The first step in my process is always helping people to find their heart, find what they loved about this thing originally. Once we have that, show me all the things that you love about this cool thing. And then after that, well, heart's back inside of our chest.
I'm Charla Lauriston, a stand-up comedian, writer, director, and producer, and this is the Werking Writer Podcast, where screenwriters, creatives, and industry insiders share their stories of breaking in hopes that it helps you along your path. I'm so excited you could join us. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Without further ado, let's get to work. Welcome to another episode of the Werking Writer Podcast. I am Charla Lauriston, and I'm so excited that you're here because I absolutely loved this episode with Ben Axelrad. Ben Axelrad is a Los Angeles-based TV, movie writer, and consultant who's devoted his career to original scripts. He's sold and developed his work with NBC Universal, ABC Studios, John Legend's Get Lifted Entertainment, Huevos Animation, and others. Since 2016, he's been the sole owner and operator of Ben Axelrad Pilots, a TV writing school that has provided education, motivation, and guidance to thousands of students around the world, both in person and online. So I met Ben because I took his class, and I only took his class because my little sister Jemima was absolutely raving about his class. She loved it so much that I was like, oh, I have to take this class. So I took one of Ben's courses, his pilot writing course, and it's probably the best TV writing course I've ever taken. And I've taken a bunch. And I think the reason why Ben's class is so excellent is because he has this kind of philosophical, existential view of writing. I think he sees it as a way towards healing. We're being very emotional about it, but I think honestly, writers are very emotional. And we talk about that in this episode, how a lot of the times as writers, we sort of gravitate towards writing because it's a way of making sense of the world for us. You know, maybe some of us were kind of weird kids. I know I was absolutely a weird kid. I was a very shy, quiet kid. And escaping into my mind was something that really helped me. And in my adulthood, writing has been something that's been very healing for me. That's what Ben kind of brings into his class. It's kind of like working with a therapist and a preacher at the same time. Honestly, because he speaks to a lot of our imposter syndrome and a lot of our anxiety about being good and getting the validation of the world from our writing. So it can get kind of deep. And I actually appreciate that is missing sometimes in writing courses, that they can be very cut and dry and very cold. And we absolutely need structure. You know, at least for my mind, getting towards structure from a emotional point of view was probably the best way that I could have approached writing. Because at the end of the day, that's the way that we get to our best writing, by saying something that is important to us. And I think the things that are important to us are the things that conjure up real emotion inside of us. We also get into talking about selling writing and the corporate environment of screenwriting that you get into when you enter Hollywood, which is kind of at odds with what it takes to be good. What I'm saying is that it takes getting to real emotion to write something good, but then at the same time, you're selling it to this very cold corporate structure that doesn't care about your emotion, but definitely wants to commoditize it. So I don't know, we get kind of existential, we get kind of philosophical in this episode, and it's one of the reasons why I love it so much. Ben's also going to be at the Werking Writer School in July. We're going to be doing a live virtual mentor session / writing workshop. It'll be free for members of the Werking Writer School, and it will be open to the public. You can get your tickets if you want to join that event. It's going to be great, and I hope to see you there. Make sure to sign up for the mailing list if you want information about that July workshop. That's it for now. That's it from me. I hope you enjoy this episode with Ben Axelrad as much as I did. Check it out. Ben Axelrad, I'm so happy to have you on the show. I don't know why I screamed your name like that just now. But
Charla, I'm so happy to be here. No, I've screamed it as well.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you for matching my energy. Yeah.
Of course. No, thank you for having me on here. It's a pleasure to talk to you always, and to do it in front of the millions and millions of online supporters. All the better.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I won't make a joke about how no one knows about this podcast yet, but at some point, someone will.
They will.
So I like to start the pod just by getting some background info on my guests. If you can tell us, where are you from and what is your cultural background?
Well, I was born outside of Austin, Texas, raised in Detroit, Michigan. I am white on the side of Jewish. So we became white like about 50 years ago.
Oh, nice.
I'm soaking up all the
Your
privilege.
family specifically, or all Jews?
Specifically our family.
Oh, okay.
Jews in general, but I feel like my family led the charge.
All right.
Yeah. Are Jews white? I mean,
yeah, Jews are white.
There are plenty of Jews that argue yes, and are plenty that argue no.
Again, another podcast. Yeah.
The Are Jews White podcast.
Are Jews White podcast. It could be a whole thing. Did you go to college?
I did. I went to a couple of them. I went to a school in New York, in Manhattan, the New School for Social Research, for like 3 years. And then I dropped out to do stand-up for a while. And then when things weren't going super great in stand-up, I realized, oh, you should go back to college and actually try this time. So then I finished at a school outside of Detroit, Oakland University. I use that degree almost never. It was a communications degree. It was sort of just to finish. Because at a certain point when you aren't succeeding and you're this close to done with your college degree, you think, all right, maybe I'll finish this thing. And I couldn't tell you when that was. Finished at Oakland. I started at the new school.
What made you decide to go for, what was the major called? Sociology or?
Oh, communications?
No, the first one.
Oh, the first degree I went, New School for Social Research. Now it's called New School University, but at the time it was called the New School for Social Research. It was like an institution in New York that was founded by a lot of blacklisted supposed communists. The school was mostly taught by visiting professors who had poetry careers or some career in the field that they hoped to work in, and then would take a little bit of time to come and teach rapscallions like me.
Whoa.
And so I was a theater major there, took classes and goofed off. And mostly what I would do is skip class and line students up on the stoops and tell them jokes. And so at a certain point, it was like, maybe I should try to do this instead of spending all this money on a college degree that I'm clearly not going to use.
Wow.
And so I did that. And like I said, that didn't work out so well either.
I mean, I could argue it worked out.
Oh, yeah, it all worked out in the end. But yes, at the time, my feeling was, why am I going to college if all I want to do is crack jokes at people lined up in rows, similar to how they would be at a comedy club? And then by devoting myself purely to that, realized like, oh, this is not my calling. This is a fun little thing to do on the side every once in a while, but no, I'll go back to school and see if I can't figure myself out a little bit better. Because I think one of the things that I learned from doing stand-up at the time was that I had not really curated my own voice, that I was sort of cracking jokes as defense mechanism, but that I hadn't really learned how to use whatever my inherent skills are to like really communicate ideas and ideals that mattered to me. And so I went back to school and acknowledged that I didn't know everything, which is hard at that age because I think I wasn't so tuned into the reality that I was a young idiot. But I let myself grow a little bit. Look at me now. I'm here on the podcast with you. So it all worked out.
You made it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I made it.
Well,
I made it.
I love what you said about not really knowing what your voice is, because this is one of my favorite parts about doing stand-up, is that self-discovery that comes along with it, that is kind of necessary to grow as both a writer and a comedian, because you're very much a writer when you're a stand-up comedian. Definitely. But I wanted to ask you about choosing the New School for Social Research, because this is a very specific choice, Ben. Some might say random if they didn't know you. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what kind of kid were you? Were you like a very philosophical kid? Were you very like revolutionary?
Yeah, both. I got into, I would say, my fair share of trouble. I wouldn't say that I had like a particularly difficult upbringing, but I would say that I had one in which I sort of went inward quite a bit and sort of kept to myself a lot. I think this is sort of something that's probably a similar experience I had that plenty of people have who end up on this career path that we're on. I liked playing make them up more than the other kids did. I was a kid who had stuffed animals until like way later than the other kids. And it was not a point of popularity. It was not like, hey, maybe we should play with the stuffed animals too. No, it was, let's take that from him and make him feel very bad about himself. And I think like I've always been pretty good at creating sort of an armor against bullying or whatever, getting picked on. Like I'm pretty good at like, if I like it, that's good enough for me. And if you like it, that's good enough for you. And you telling me that the thing that I like is dumb or whatever, it's never really impacted me all that much. But so in terms of the career path, I think I always sort of motivated towards places where people were also thinking a little bit outside the box in one way or another. It's what led me to Hollywood. But first, in terms of your question about the New School for Social Research, it's where there were a lot of outside thinking type of individuals present. And yeah, when I was in school, I got into some trouble. There were 3 schools in my district. There were 2 very sort of standardized schools. And then there was what was called the Model High School. And the Model High School was designed for students like me who had bad attention problems and maybe some difficulty focusing in other ways as well. What you would do at the Model High School, you'd go for like 3 or 5 hours out of the day, out of a 7-hour day. They would have you develop your own curriculum. Let's say your 3 classes were English, social studies, and technology. Then maybe what you would do for the semester was you would develop a curriculum that was focused on, say, the technological advancements during World War II, and you'd write a series of essays about it, and then you'd be graded on that, sort of designed for yourself what interested and motivated you. And I was their prize pupil. The school started 1 year before I entered high school. By the time I graduated, I had like a scholarship from having gone around, like I would tour the state with the program and give my sort of vantage point on this like alternative education. Junior or senior year, I worked with the superintendent of schools and we developed a curriculum reform proposal that they like still use at my school to this day. I always embraced that I was weird. Other people...
You're calling something that is exceptional, you're calling it weird.
Yeah. You're probably right. Like, I mean, I'm good at the things that I'm good at for sure. And I'm not good at the things that I'm not good at. I've always been pretty in tune with what makes me special a little bit. And then I'm not special because I'm special. I'm special because I'm me, and you're special because you're you.
Your specialness doesn't take away from my specialness. And I love that you know that you're special. This is wonderful.
Exactly. And so, I just found myself motivated. I applied to 3 schools and they were all very liberal arts schools because I just wasn't going to excel in places that had lecture oriented. The irony being that I now teach a lecture class, but at the time I couldn't have sat still and I couldn't have focused. And so I went to the place where I thought, oh, these people will like me for me, because I think in particular at that age, that's a real calling. It's just like, who's going to let me be the person that I'm trying to evolve into? And so at the school, I went from being a person who like literally had no friends in high school to being very social and very popular and encouraging others. There's nothing like let your freak flag fly about it. I think that's dismissive, but there is just, hey, I'm this kid in the dorm room next to you that has a bed full of stuffed animals and likes to play make 'em up. And if that's fun for you, then come next door and play. And if there's something else that you like to do that's fun, clue me into it and I'll come over and play. But like, I've really always been good at saying, whatever you think is cool, I'm going to meet you there and think it's cool too, because I think you're cool.
I love that.
And it worked. And in high school, it didn't work. And in college, it started to work.
High school is not a real place. I actually feel like that should come with a warning or like just, some sort of label right before you go to high school that none of these experiences are real. Truly, it's the worst place.
I agree.
It's the worst place.
I agree.
None of us are fully formed human beings and none of us should be held to a real standard at all because we're not in a good place in high school.
No.
Absolutely not.
But they're asking us to make what feel like really important decisions from this place of like, it's very
when
stressful.
You're children.
Yeah.
You're basically children with boobs, essentially, when you're...
Yeah. I was not prepared to make those decision.
Yeah.
I was not mature. I don't know that I'm mature now, but I definitely at that time, I think I enjoyed that. I liked reveling in my youth. I liked getting to be wrong.
Yeah, at 16 and 17, even though there are parts of it that sucks, you know you're young and it's awesome and you'll never get it back. And I do think back on that time like that.
Me too. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that no one could really expect me to have it figured out yet. And then they do.
Yeah.
They expect you to have something figured out. And I didn't. I didn't know.
Or they take what you say very seriously, which is another thing that I think is insane. When you're in high school and you say, I want to be a doctor or whatever, like everybody's just like, yeah, go do that. And
yeah, I know that's insane.
So many people. Yeah, that's insane. So many people I know, like they look up from the trajectory that they chose at 17 and they're like, what the hell was I doing?
I love the idea that no matter what stage you're at in life, you're not out of the game in terms of like making a new choice, trying something different. The thing that we're going to primarily talk about today, 10 years ago, I had no clue this would be a facet of my life. And now I would say it's the most prominent part of it.
Absolutely.
How do you possibly know?
You don't know.
We'd never heard of COVID 5 years ago.
Yeah. I don't think it'd be any fun to know.
No.
Your trajectory seems like it gave you a real unfair advantage, I must say,
Okay.
because you came from a high school and a college that had very ambiguous expectations. It kind of forced you to create a structure for yourself. It forced you to be in charge of your learning and education in a way that you might not have been otherwise. What I think is interesting about the profession of screenwriting and just being in Hollywood in general is that it is extremely amorphous, and we come from these structures like school and the world of 9 to 5. We come from these rigid structures like the American school system, like work culture. And I found that for somebody like me who came from these structures, it was extremely difficult to sort of loosen up and let go of so much control emotionally, mentally, whatever it was that I needed to do to sort of just accept that this is an amorphous career, that there is no structure, that you kind of have to create your own curriculum. You really have to basically create the career on your own. So I do think it has given you an advantage. And that's clear to me because, one of the reasons why I asked you on the show, Ben, was because I really love your course. I've taken your course and you've been a wonderful writing coach for me. And I highly recommend you everywhere that I go.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get into your course, but I wanted to just talk about how you have shaped a career for yourself that's very specific to you. So can you talk a little bit about that? What was your journey to breaking in and what it looked like and what led you to creating Ben Axelrad Pilots?
Well, I guess before that, I'll just sort of preamble by saying I probably got started in Hollywood at a pretty late age. As much as what you are saying is very accurate about my upbringing leading to a stronger than average sense of self-motivation and an ability to create meaning where
structures.
Yeah, where it's the structure. One of my go-to quotes is always this DMX quote: "To live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffer."
The philosopher.
Yeah, the dog man philosopher. Yeah. I think I'm pretty good at that. I think I'm pretty good at finding meaning in situations and building structure around that meaning. But when I started Ben Axelrad Pilots, it was because I started to have less writing success. And I moved here to Los Angeles. Well, I'm in Phoenix right now, but I moved to Los Angeles when I was 31, fresh off of a breakup. I was living in Detroit. I just worked as a courier at a law firm. I didn't really have any ambitions. Yes, you are right that I am very self-motivated and that I am good at creating structure for myself where it doesn't already exist. But because of my upbringing, I wasn't naturally inclined towards knowing how to get jobs. Like, you've had a lot of jobs, and I think sometimes the structure leads us to know how to like play the game a little bit better than I ever knew how to play the game. And so I got really lucky. I mean, luck is one way to describe it. But when I sold my first script, it was because I had a friend that got promoted at NBC Universal. He was an assistant to the head of development at NBC Universal, and he got promoted to a junior executive, and he turned to all of his friends and he said, I need scripts to bring with me so that I can show my ability to develop. And everybody except for me said, I'm going to just touch this thing up and I will send it to you in a week. And I said, I'll send mine to you now. And mine was not good enough. It wasn't even close to good enough, but it was the first one he saw and he liked the idea and he worked with me on it. And so I started to gain a little bit of traction in my career and I had some success and I was writing and it seemed like, oh, this thing is going to work out. And then it stopped working out because yes, it's absolutely amorphous. It is also momentumless at times. Like there are times where it really feels like we are picking up steam. And then there are other times where it feels like, oh, wow, I cannot, like this is a Sisyphean rock. I cannot seem to push it. And so I was in that period where I was just not having success. But I had this job at the time working for Amazon Studios. I was like maybe the first or the second person that they ever hired. And my whole job was just to say, people would submit scripts from far and wide. I would read them and just say yes or no. And yes didn't mean yes, but no did mean no. And so if I said yes, somebody else would read it. They eventually convinced me that there was nothing that they were going to say yes to. So I just started saying no repeatedly, which emotionally was breaking my heart because you're not actually telling this young writer, this young aspirational person why they aren't succeeding. You're just telling them no. And so that really hurt. But I was making decent money doing it. And so I moved into a new apartment. The new apartment was like $400 more per month. Literally the day after I signed the lease, I got laid off by Amazon.
Damn.
And suddenly it was like, well, necessity is the mother of invention. The thing that I knew more than anything was that I wanted to help these people. You can't teach somebody how to get a guaranteed yes, but you can teach them how to avoid the guaranteed no. And I really wanted to present that information. Some of it was just basic stuff that you learn along the way. Like, for instance, that Amazon Studio, if your script came in at more than 36 pages, we weren't even allowed to read it. We had to just deposit it in that little receptacle at the bottom of your screen. So I could start teaching people. I developed this little class where 8 people would gather in Los Feliz in Los Angeles. 8 people would gather in this little black box theater with me, and everybody would show up with an idea week 1, and by week 8 everybody had a finished script. And not only could they say like thank you for helping me, they could also say you're welcome for offering that same contribution. And you could just like really build community, and you could remind people why they got into this in the first place, because wherever it was that they were coming from, people weren't as excited about these ideas as they were. And when you're around people who are equally excited, like when we're working together, like, yeah, I'm good at my job, but I like your script. I like your idea. So it's just having a friend to bat this thing around with, when most of the time it feels very isolating. It feels very
Absolutely
lonely. I wanted to create an environment where I could make positive impacts, where I felt like I was just leaving people sad and longing in a way that I think is sort of industry gaslighting. Like, I don't think they want you to know how to improve, because if you knew how to improve, when you improved and they still said no, well, now what's the rationale? So instead, we're led to believe that like just keep throwing shit at the wall. And as a result, we don't ever get to have the experience of, and this is what having the class has afforded me, just getting to write for whatever we need for our own personal self-actualization. I just need to grow as a human being, and writing is the only way that I know how to do that.
I think that's so interesting, because that is one of the things that I got unexpectedly from working with you, which I've gotten a lot. And number one is that not being so isolated during the process, because usually I am writing it by myself for a very long time before I show it to friends that I trust. But at that point, I've already thought through the entire idea by myself. So working in this really collaborative fashion where it does feel like I'm just throwing out ideas and we're just messing around has been really helpful, and has helped to make it more of a playful, more of a enjoyable experience, because it can be torturous at times.
I love that.
And I also think that you're right, that there is I don't don't want to say emptiness, but it is not as satisfying, when you're getting paid for something or when you're trying to sell something. The process just isn't as satisfying. It loses a little bit of it to me. And it's true. It's because it's not gratifying in the same way that it is of like, oh, I accomplished something. I did something difficult. I was able to clarify an idea and get it from my mind onto the page in a way that is coherent and in a way that is moving to other people, and that feels good as a writer. And I think it's something that we need as writers. And I think that's really amazing that that's something that you wanted to give to people, because you recognize that you don't really get it from this process, this, I think, very corporatized process of Hollywood.
Yeah.
I love that you did that and that you created that community.
Thank you. Yeah. And in COVID, it seemed like it was going to be hard to maintain it in COVID, because the beauty of the class was 8 people gathered in this like one space together. And we really required that you would look at your calendar and say, like, I really do have these weeks available to me, so that you could be accountable to the group and accountable to yourself. Yeah, I really discovered, along the way, you're absolutely right that like my upbringing and the way, in particular, the schools that I went to equipped me to say, it's okay for me to do it my way. We look at our society and everything is agrarian. We're living like we're farmers, 200 years ago. It's like, nah, it doesn't work for me, Like, it doesn't work for me to wake up at, decide that I'm going to work from 9 until 5 p.m.
It's so true. Modern life feels very old-timey for some reason. Gender roles are still very much the same. Everything is the same. You're totally right.
Everything is the same. And if you just allow, like, nothing changes in this world unless we make it. Whether we're talking about systemic racism or our careers, nothing changes unless you decide, like, I'm going to do something to make things different. I just recognized that everybody I knew who were the smartest, funniest, most creative people I had encountered had vicious imposter syndrome. So who did that to you? Because you didn't show up here with it. You showed up here knowing that you loved to play creative arts with your friends. I said, like, what if we just get back to that and we see what happens? And it's hard for a lot of people, but for me, and in part because I make money doing this business, I'm not in that same place I was where I was scrounging for every penny, like hoping that I could find some way to make a career for myself. Like, this is my career now. And I love what I do, but mostly I love what I do because it reminds people at the most crucial moment, stop doing what other people want, do what you want in a way that satisfies other people's concerns, and let's just take it from there. Because your story is everybody's story, but it's also just yours. And so first and foremost, let it just be yours, and then we'll figure out the way to share it when you're done playing with it. But I think the hardest thing about this industry for me is that we say to people like, hey, Charla, what's the thing that you love most about yourself? Like, what's your favorite thing in this world? And then when you tell it to us, we're like, how much for me to buy it off you? What? Yeah. I'm not trying to sell my favorite thing in the entire world. Like, that's my thing. But sometimes I'll write a script and I'll play around in an idea for a while and I'll get the transformation that I need out of it. And then once I've gotten everything I need, well, now the industry becomes my younger sibling who I hand me down this project too, and hopefully they'll enjoy it as well. But first, I got to be the one who enjoys it, because I'm doing this because there's something about the world that I don't quite grasp, and I'd like to understand it better.
You better preach, Ben. Sometimes I feel like you're like a white TD Jakes or something, but like,
yes, I'm a believer. I mean, not everybody in the industry is, have a lot of faith, and that's very important to me in my creative pursuit. And so when people say things like that to me, you've got a little bit of gospel in you.
You do.
Oh, I love that more than hearing I'm a good writer.
Yeah. Can I ask, what is your faith? Is it Christianity, or is it even like a structured religion? What is it?
I wouldn't say it's particularly structured, but the way that I often describe it is, because I don't really have like a good sort of like construct for it, but there's this thing I read many years ago. It was a book called The Blind Watchmaker, and it was like sort of a scientific evidence for the existence of God. The idea behind The Blind Watchmaker, this like one little section of this book written by this physicist, I think Richard Dawkins wrote it, was that if you and I are walking through a field, we're walking through a heath, and we stumble upon a wristwatch, you look down and you see a wristwatch, you would say to yourself, like, oh, that wristwatch must have been left there by someone, because there's nothing about a wristwatch that we would suggest has always existed. If, on the other hand, we were walking through and we saw a misshapen rock or something, just something that caught our eye, we would think to ourselves, oh, it's possible that that rock has existed here forever. But nothing has existed here forever. Something was placed there by someone who preceded us. And that helped me to wrap my head around the concept of God, that like, I was not born into a finished product. I am not a finished product. Whether it is someone who looks like the white image of Christ or whatever, I don't tend to believe in that specifically, but like whether it's someone who looks like a human or some force that is the entirety of existence, something created the existence that I can wrap my head around. And to me, anything short of that is failing to acknowledge that we didn't create all of it, that like my brain isn't the reason that all of this makes sense. It existed before me. It will exist after me. And there's great value from a creative standpoint to me in acknowledging that, because it puts me closer to the creator when I myself am trying to create. And nothing that I will ever create is going to be on the level of, and on the seventh day, God rests or whatever.
Right.
But I still want to take it that seriously because I love it as much as I would have to believe that God should love, you know? I don't believe in that we're sinners in the hands of an angry God. Like, I don't believe that like we were put here to suffer. And you can cut all that if you want, if it's too rambly. But yeah, that's sort of what I believe in.
I mean, well, damn, Ben, I didn't know this was about to be a sermon. You should have told me.
Yeah. I guess in a nutshell, what I believe is that I am not God.
Good. I think that's good. Yeah, it does sound like having faith has given you perspective, which I think it gives all of us. It's the purpose of it, I think.
Yeah.
To make us a little bit less self-centered, a little bit less myopic in our obsession with our own lives, you know, and just get outside of yourself for a little bit. I think that's beautiful.
Can I ask what your faith is? Do you want to talk about it?
Ooh, oh, interesting. Let's take a quick break, actually. And then when we come back, I'll tell you what my faith is.
Love it.
I'm quickly interrupting this episode to tell you about theworkingwriter.com. It's a resource I created for screenwriters and creative entrepreneurs that includes a blog, a course, and this podcast. Right now, when you sign up for the mailing list, you'll get my free guide to breaking into television. It's everything I've learned about breaking in, and it's basically what I've said to any writer who's asked to pick my brain over coffee. If you're working on breaking into TV, I hope it gives you some concrete steps to get to the next level in your journey. Go to theworkingwriter.com and sign up for the mailing list now to download your free guide to breaking into TV. Are you a screenwriter who's feeling stuck or lost or just wanting to take your career to the next level? Then you need to check out the Werking Writer School. The Werking Writer School is an online course and community I created that trains screenwriters to become creative entrepreneurs who can confidently navigate building a professional network, attract managers and agents, manage their personal finances, pitch a TV show, and consistently produce original work they're proud of. When you join with one of our flexible membership options, you'll get the course, plus live monthly virtual workshops with writers from Portlandia, American Dad, The Last OG, and more. Go to theworkingwriter.com/school and sign up today to get training, mentorship, and support from a community of writers just like you. Now, back to the episode. I spent a long time, I grew up Baptist Christian in a Haitian Baptist church, and it was very much an angry God. It was very much, you know, like we're all sinners and like we always have to be hating ourselves for that. There was also this just constant belief in the Haitian churches that I grew up in that basically we're only here to repent and then like real life starts when we die and go to heaven, which I always thought was just such a huge waste of time. Like, you know, we're spending all this time here thinking that, you know, the being here is useless only to die. I'm like, what a horrible religion. What a horrible way to go through life. I would look at my parents sometimes and I'd be like, really? Like, this is really what we're doing? Like, and it was boring, which I think was the biggest sin of all, was just to make this boring. And, you know, I'd always be hungry. There'd always be like extremely long services. then I'd be hangry, and then you couldn't get a word in. You couldn't get me to be a believer at all, because now I'm hungry and I'm cranky. You need to wake up at the butt crack of dawn to be here.
Yeah.
In general, I feel like I've always been like a scumbag at my core. Like I've always been a comic. Like I've always just been somebody who's just like very skeptical. I was a very skeptical child. I was just like, this just doesn't quite fit in my mind. This doesn't make sense. And my dad is very similar. My dad's always been very funny to me because he's, he'll go to church because my mom makes us all go to church. But so I've had like a very antagonistic or just like not positive relationship with religion for most of my life. And I left it for a while. Then after I moved to New York after college, I just left church for a long time. I would say like maybe a decade. And then I feel like recently I've kind of just been like looking for kind of what you're talking about, which is just a sense of connection, because I think it can be very like isolating and lonely when you're so self-centered and thinking about yourself all the time. I think it's very healing, especially after a pandemic, after everything that we've been through, to like think about other people and open my mind past myself and think about how I can help other people, how I can be of service. To me, that is kind of my spirituality right now. You guys can't see it, but Ben is giving me poetry snaps.
Poetry snaps.
He's giving me poetry snaps. Yeah.
So you do when you don't want to interrupt, but you want somebody to know. I'm with you.
I appreciate it. I know you're with me. Yeah, that's why I said amen. I said preach when you were talking, because it's like, it sounds rambling, it sounds crazy, but at the end of the day, I genuinely think that having a good relationship with your existence, having a sense of purpose, whatever it is that you need to give you that, I think it's reflected in your work. I think it's reflected in the writing. I think it can be a very profound experience personally to try to uncover what's going on with me internally. You know what, Ben, we're getting real deep.
I love it. I love it.
I love it. But I think it's important, like as a writer, because I think that like writing is like one of those professions that just makes you kind of like have to dig through your own mind and your history and everything. And I think it can be a very profound experience personally. So it's great.
Hugely, hugely. And we can get into some of the business stuff right after this if you want. But I will say that like what you were describing, that existential experience that comes with writing, like I think if a person allows themselves to, then you're always having this very even keel, grounded existential experience through your writing. And if you're somebody who ignores that stuff or who pushes it away, you only write when you get to an existential crisis. And that's too big. That's too big. Sometimes we can't overcome the existential crisis through writing a pithy little pilot script or whatever, but you can deal with the day-to-day of your life. And that tends to be what's best about television, is just
the smallness and bigness of life at the same time. That's all TV is.
Exactly. The minutia under the microscope.
Yeah.
We're on the same page.
We are. You know what I think is interesting, Ben, is that this part of us that makes it difficult to write is also the part of us that we need to write, or the part of us that I think allows us to write, which I always find to be such a maddening, such a hilarious, whether it's God or Satan, whoever did it, she's brilliant. and it's hysterical. I wanted to talk about your class because I've taken a lot of screenwriting classes. Taking them at UCLA Extension and like all these other places, whatever. I don't need to list out the places that I've taken classes, but I've taken a bunch. Number one, I find good screenwriting courses hard to find. And number two, I would say that your class stands out as one of the best because of just its unflinching clarity. You explain and deliver what a pilot is supposed to do and how to structure a pilot in such a clear way. I love the storytelling that you kind of use to like explain to us how to tell a story. And I've been writing for a long time and it still has been hugely helpful to me to take your class, I
appreciate that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how did you develop this teaching style?
Well, I developed it by teaching myself, I think, because I didn't go to school for any of this kind of stuff. And then by the time I moved to Los Angeles, I sort of felt like I didn't have time to spend in class. I mean, I could have taken classes like the ones that you were describing, like the UCLA extension stuff. You weren't hearing a lot of good things about any of these classes. I came to understand privilege through like just this idea that like, oh, there were all these kids that like at 18, they decided they wanted to do this and they spent 4 years prepping to enter into this world. And now they're like putting their scripts out there and they have it. And how am I going to possibly break through? So my answer to that was just I started watching a lot of television and I started writing and writing and writing and allowing it to be very bad. But in doing so, I sort of figured out how to be both the teacher and the student simultaneously and the two-way street of education. I also will say that I come from a background of my mom did research and development for like public schools when I was growing up. And so I think I naturally have sort of an ability to make sense out of school structures, or I think I have like an inherited ability to do so. Mostly it was just at the beginning of the class, like I said earlier, necessity is the mother of invention. I start this class and I say, I have to figure this out. And the one thing that I always know about me is I will work and work and work until I make sense out of it. So if in this first class, I am not great at my job, then I will make up for it with sheer elbow grease. That I know that if I'm not getting it right, that we'll work together until we figure it out. It's the same thing that I tell myself to this day if I'm working with you, for instance. If you show up with something in your script and I don't have a perfect answer to it, then I'm not going to beat myself up for not having the perfect answer. I'm going to work with my friend Charla until we figure out the solution. And it's ultimately, I learned along the way, I am always correct, but I am not always right. I know I've read thousands and thousands of scripts. I know objectively what belongs here, but it's your story to tell. And sometimes what makes a story interesting is that place in which it deviates from the norm. And so I'm really good at listening to the student. The student is always correct. But then from there, when the student comes to me with a question, I know to answer that question in a way that doesn't lead to more questions. Like if you have a question, then my answer will give you direction. If you have direction, then what I will do is I will listen to that and ask only questions where something feels missing, redundant, or unclear. But I think so many people in my position feel like they need to get it perfectly right and they need to prove themselves. Nah, I want you to tell me what this story is. And in a Rick Rubin kind of way, all I need to do is really, really listen to what you want to say. And then I can help you to communicate that with the world. But at the beginning, I just thought to myself, like, I know I care enough about people and enough about TV stories that we will figure it out. But I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that together, I think we'll come up with something that's really fun and cool. And then along the way, like my class will tell somebody in 5 weeks or in 8 weeks, you're going to have a finished script, because I think it gives people this comfort to know that the thing isn't going to go on forever. But then once we start meeting, as you can attest to, it's not about 5 to 8 weeks. We're going to do this until you're happy, until you feel like we're ready to put this one behind us. But if I said, hey, nebulously, come and work with me until this thing feels done, you said, I've been nebulously working on this thing forever. So I give you structure when you are feeling too loosey-goosey, and I give you loosey-goosey when you're feeling too uptight.
Yeah.
And I'm good at it because I listen to you. There's nothing natural about it. I just know that you're in charge.
Right.
That's a hard thing for white men. That's always been a hard thing for white men. But I'm better at it than the average white man.
All right, good.
Maybe it's that Judaism.
All right, you're barely a Jew. I feel like another advantage you have is that you've worked with so many writers. Mm-hmm. The more writers I work with, the more that I see the same sorts of issues coming up. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the common issues that you see with writers that are struggling with scripts? And what advice do you have to people?
Well, in the class has sort of informed me that there are 3 things that categorically tend to stress TV writers out. Structure is one of them. Structure is a huge one. I think in particular, anybody who didn't go to film writing school or whatever expressly for this thing. I was very
insecure about structure because I didn't go to film school.
Yeah. And I think it's like the thing that we talk ourselves into. So structure was one. Subplots was the other. My class was originally called Are we allowed to cuss?
Of course.
Okay, yeah.
We've been saying Jew the whole time.
Oh, that's true. But I'm a Jew.
I always feel bad when I say it, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. That's true. I forgot that is technically one. My class was originally called Fuck Your B Plot, because it was just like people were showing up with this idea. It's like, oh, I can't show my script until I have this like perfect subplot. And it's like, no one has ever bought a script based on a subplot. Like, that's insane. But it was really always just like, this is the thing that I'm allowing myself to believe is real so that I don't have to show my work to others. And that's the big one, is like a fear of vulnerability, a fear of putting yourself out there. I think people respond to me somewhat. I think this has been a thing between you and I in particular, is like in the session, in that little space, no boundaries. Whatever you are feeling in the moment, you are free to express. I want you to express it. I want you to get all of your feelings out, because I don't want there to be one thing that's unspoken that we allow to get in the way down the road. So let's have this experience together in which we acknowledge that this thing is hard and this thing is scary, and oftentimes we feel like frauds, and then we work through it by creating something that is indelible. Like, when you have the script, you, at least for a little while, have to listen to what that script said. I am somebody who is capable of having nice things.
You know what's interesting, Ben, is that I have found your sessions to be somewhat of a therapy session. What's up with that? I did say earlier that the thing that makes us writers is the thing that makes it hard to be a writer, or like whatever it is that I said. But I'm just like, what is that? Why is writing so emotional and vulnerable and difficult in a way that it doesn't seem like it should be that difficult?
I think sometimes it's because somebody else hasn't figured it out first. And sometimes it's because it's something very personal to us that we are the only ones that can figure out. And sometimes it's just, I think we've talked about it before. It was this thing, I can never quite get it right, the phrasing, so I just paraphrase it. This thing that I heard the poet Audre Lorde say once, which was, poetry is just casual phrases that the human mind hasn't thought up yet. Like, eventually, the thing that the poet says becomes the way that we casually speak to each other. But first, somebody has to have these thoughts. I think a lot of times we are writing personal enough stories that nobody else can have the thought for us. Sometimes it's as big and encompassing as like, oh, I guess I do have to acknowledge that I'm not a complete piece of shit, that I am good enough, that I am worthy of having love and having nice things or whatever. And then sometimes it's like, this idea hasn't quite been cracked yet. I remember when I was like in middle school and my parents were going through a divorce, and this was sort of like a very fresh period for divorce. Now, 50-60% of people end up in divorce. It's a reality. But at the time, it wasn't the case. They were having me go to these support groups for other kids who were in a similar situation. And I just felt like the rhetoric that we were exchanging wasn't soothing me. And so I needed to sit down and pop at the computer until I could figure out what message I needed to tell myself. I think a lot of times we are waiting for somebody else to give us the message that we need to be both the speaker and recipient of. As writers, it's like, it doesn't mean that we're getting it right for everybody. Sometimes we do, and that's beautiful. But more often than not, we're just getting it right for ourselves, for the moment, as a form of self-soothe. It would be nice if somebody could just come along and say, like, Charla, I have lived your life before you, and I will tell you how to do it. But one, we both know there's only one Charla, baby. Yeah. Only one of these. Right here. And I get to talk to her for right now.
Yeah, for these few minutes. You're such a philosopher, Ben. Are you going to write a book?
I have been working on a book a little bit, like some of like what the class is. I start and stop a lot. I will ultimately write one, I think, but I really prefer the philosophy of this conversation.
Nah, no, don't cop out, Ben. Write this book. Okay, stop stalling. I want the book.
Okay.
Because I like how your mind works. I like how you think. I think you are a very clear communicator, and I can tell that you're a good writer. I think it'll be a good book. I feel like in taking your class, in coaching with you, you've clearly like hit a nerve. You've connected something between our emotions and how we write, really being sort of a conduit for that. I don't know how you're doing it. I don't know what's going on.
I stole it from Moana. That's what I always say in the class.
Wonderful film.
Yes. Have you seen Moana?
Yeah, I have. It's
the
wonderful.
Disney. Yeah. That part, the big thing in my class, and I speak it about the entertainment industry. I have crossed the horizon to find you. I know your name. They have stolen the heart from inside you, but this does not define you. This is not who you are. And so I think the first step in my process is always just like helping people to find their heart, like find what like they loved about this thing originally. And then once we have that, like, oh, show me all the things that you love about this cool thing. And then after that, well, heart's back inside of our chest,
I love it.
I'll make it fun for you, whether it's you or somebody else who signs up for some experience with me.
Yeah.
You're not doing this because you have to. You should be doing it because you love it. I'll help you to love it again. Folks, I'll help you to love it.
I love this message that you have. It seems like the message that I get from you over and over is to do the writing for the love of the writing and not so much for whatever outcome is possible in terms of fame and riches and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about making your own way in a career, if that is clear at all?
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have to people to sort of like carve their own path?
What advice do I have to people to carve their own path? Let's see. To some extent, there is that expression like, get in where you fit in. I subscribe to it to a certain extent. I think more than anything, though, a person has to, in this life, find a way to be useful. I think until we find a way to be useful, we don't really believe in ourselves. I think even to this day, like as I work in this career, and I have had a lot of students and a lot of successful students and a lot of people who sing my praises and treat me with a great deal of respect, and I'm very appreciative of it. I still will oftentimes stay longer than I need to be staying in a session because I always feel like I should be giving more and more and more. On the one hand, I try to combat that notion that nothing that I do is ever good enough because that's insane. On the other hand, I really embrace the idea that I love giving. When I was carving out this little niche within like the world of TV writing or writing in general, script writing in general, I had to acknowledge that in terms of like accepting both the yes and the no, the yes was like, oh, this is going to be successful and I'll make lots of money and I'll do it because I've carved out like a little place for myself in the industry. The no is people are not interested. They don't want to do this thing. They don't care. They don't want to spend the money. And I didn't know when I was going into it. And so I had to say to myself, am I going to be willing to do this if the answer turns out to be no? And the answer was yes. But I definitely would have kept doing it because I had done it my whole life. Like I love helping people. Like if it wasn't a career and you and I just met in life and we were a couple of writers that turned out to be friends, this is what I would be doing also. I learned along the way that people like to spend the money because it feels transactional in a way that's just makes them feel comfortable asking for what they need as opposed to just sort of saying, would you mind helping me? And your voice goes like 3 octaves up, So having the transactional element to it was useful. But really what I discovered was like, if you don't believe that you have something to give, how can you possibly sell it? So I just had to be willing to give it and to afford it to people and for them to see, oh, okay, this guy like cares enough to be of service. Then from there, I could start building something that was more concrete, that was more of a program. But first, I just had to believe that
that you had something valuable to share.
Yeah. And I didn't at first. Like, I think we all want to. And then in terms of like actually like building the program, a willingness to fail. It's hugely important. Not even necessarily in that Thomas Edison way of like, I discovered, 1,000 ways to not be right on my way to being right. It was just like, this is the thing that I absolutely love to do with my time, talking about stories. And so I just did it. And then at a certain point, people wanted it to be a business. And that's like not a good piece of advice for others other than to say, my ambition wasn't to make it a successful business. Because if it had been, that's all I would have chased. My ambition was to be great at a thing. And sometimes you can chase greatness and stumble upon success. You cannot chase fame and fortune and just naturally stumble upon greatness. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm not saying I'm great at this thing, but I will say that that was my only ambition, was to like be excellent at this thing. And then if it turned into fortune, which it didn't turn into fortune, it's a fucking TV class, It does well. It does particularly well.
You make a living.
Yeah, I make a good living and I'm happy doing it. And if I stopped, if tomorrow all the money ceased, I would still do this damn thing. So nobody deserves anything in this life, but wouldn't you hope that somebody who would be willing to do it for free is the one who's making money doing it? That's what I like to believe.
You know what? I feel like whenever we're giving advice, because I asked you about how do you carve your own path, because I think that's
Yeah.
very much what you've done. I think you've just given like very cogent advice, but it's also what everyone says. Everyone that is giving advice about carving your own path talks about focusing on being good at the thing that you want to do instead of focusing on the end result of being good, which is chasing the limelight,
Yeah.
essentially, or chasing like the fame and fortune and things like that. It really is the same thing over and over, which tells me that it's real wisdom. Chasing a skill, putting time and effort into something that you want to be good at, believing that what you have is valuable. I really like that you said that because I think that that was one of my issues as well. For everything, I think it's such a normal thing to question whether or not, an idea is good. I think it's just our way of testing ideas in our own minds because it's going to take a lot of time and effort and sweat to like put something out. When I had the idea for this podcast, I went back and forth about like, is this going to be valuable to people? But I think it will be. And I had to convince myself of that first before I asked you to be on it, before I created it. So I think that that's just such a great thing to remind people of, that it's not crazy to question the value of something, but it is important. It is important to believe that it is valuable and if you want to make something happen. So it's really about believing that something is valuable, that it's possible.
And it's valuable to you. And so like you knowing that it's valuable to you suggests that it's probably going to be valuable to other people as well. That's always been such an important part of the process for me. Well, if I don't get anything out of this, why should I assume that anybody else will? And if I do get something out of it, why wouldn't I want to share that?
Right.
It's so easy for somebody to turn off this podcast if they don't like the things that we're saying, but it's definitely going to reach a lot of people. And I've directed students towards you as well. Yeah, I think there's something that's very simpatico about the services that we offer. And I think in part it's because we have shared ideologies about this type of work and we are just simpatico people. Now, I don't offer a ton of like career guidance, but I do think that I prepare people to get the service that then you offer. Like, I think there's something that is nicely preamble about like my service to your service. Yeah, no, I think it's crucially important just to give people some sort of outlet. And my class was that, and this podcast is that. Otherwise, they're listening to a voice inside their own heads that is telling them really mean stuff a lot of the time.
Absolutely. And we ain't. Last two questions. Okay. What is next for you? And do you have anything else you would want to say to a writer who wants to break in to TV?
Let's see. What is next for me? And I wouldn't say more of the same because I am somebody who's built to spill a little bit. Like I like to sort of change things up with some frequency just to keep myself from getting bored. But more of this kind of stuff. Like I love working with creatives. At this point, we sort of call it like an artist's journey as opposed to just a writer's journey. At one point, it was like a TV writer's journey, and then it's a writer's journey, and now it's an artist's journey. I've been starting to do this thing where I host creative retreats. I'm in Arizona right now, and I had somebody come for a television show a couple of weeks ago while they were on script for the show that they're working on, and they wrote the script out here, and I offer some of my existential guidance as well.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm in Arizona right now, so I'm at this place that's called the Desert Zen Retreat. By the time this podcast comes out, I won't be here any longer, but I'm sort of going to start to, as Charla knows about me, I relocate with great frequency, and I'm sort of trying to find my way to places that would be good for a meditative, creative experience, and then offer both the space and, whatever my brand of wisdom is to achieve it. And yes, this is my number one piece of advice in the class for writers is practice writing. That do not wait for somebody to give you permission by hiring you onto some show or hiring you to write their movie. You will not feel ready to do so. And so when I'm writing a script, one of the things that I do is I write practice scenes. Like before I get to the high stakes scenes of my show, one of the things that I will do is just write a bunch of scenes in which my characters are having casual interactions with each other so that I can become versed at at the way in which these people talk to each other, because you can study someone exhaustively. You can learn everything that there is objectively to know about them. You don't really know someone until you've spoken to them. If you are somebody who wants to work in dialogue-based writing, practice writing dialogue, practice writing scenes, get well-versed at the art of making people talk to each other, because they're all just ideas until we can bring them to life in script. The heart of this is really don't wait around for somebody to give you permission to write. But yes, the minutia of it, the specific is that, like, be working at this craft. Don't just be acting like this is all supposed to be fun and games. No, the existential experience is obviously a really enriching one. But if you just want to get good at the craft itself, get the frick to work at it. Practice.
You heard him.
Practice what you do.
You heard it here first. Get to work.
Get to work.
Yeah. Well, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Ben, for stopping by.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Always love talking to you, Charla.
Damn. Gotta love Ben Axelrad, the Jewish TD Jakes for writers. So motivational, so inspirational. Can't wait to have him at the Working Writer School in July. I hope you check it out. I hope you come and join us. It's going to be live. It's going to be virtual. And you're just going to get more of this sort of like inspiration while also getting the instruction on how to write a strong pilot. So can't wait for that. Come check it out. It's going to be in July. Sign up for the mailing list so that you get the info for the tickets for when it drops. I don't think there's anything more to say. You know, he already said it. So I'm just going to say my catchphrase because it's my catchphrase. You know the deal. Get out there. Get to work. Thanks for listening. There's no way I could do this podcast alone. I wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to our editor, Justin Asher, and to our other production assistants, Jemima Lariston, Maya Racole, and Nicole Edwards.